Oh, yes. Here we are. All right, everybody, let me just greet you and thank you again for being here and for really giving the kind of attention to the Word of God that is really necessary, especially in this age. My brethren, let me welcome those who are joining us on the YouTube platform. And we want to do our very best to ensure that these individuals know how grateful we are that they are joining us for this study. And last week, when we studied the word, we looked at a number of things, and we stopped at the serpent. And I can tell you something, that we have an interesting lesson, because the idea of the serpent and Satan are actually coming together in one particular reality. And it is, I believe in my heart, one of the most misunderstood of all the concepts, because there is one school of thought that believes that Satan is in fact a serpent. There are others who say no, the Hebrew designation does not speak of a Satan, it speaks of a divine one. And we're going to be looking at that. But it is important, everybody, that as we move into this particular portion of the text, which is chapter 3, that we have an understanding of what exactly is taking place here. So permit me to share my screen with you. And of course, I will, in fact, yes, I have it here. Just permit me to share my screen. And I think you're seeing the wrong thing right there. So let me stop sharing my screen. Sorry about that, everybody. I'm not as technologically savvy as I'd like to tell everybody that I am. But I'm almost sure I got it. All right, here we go again. Let me hope that I have it this time. Aha, there we go. All right, let me go to our slideshow. And of course, we're looking at the agent of the fall. The agent of the fall. Now, I must make clear from the outset and give a little context if you're going to truly understand the role that this particular agent played. First of all, we must remember that man was endued with some of the godly privileges and prerogatives, those things that make up God. He put a form of them in us in such a way that we were able to reason as he reasons, able to choose as he chooses, to make decisions as he makes decisions. And that are the only ones of his creation, as represented in the Genesis, that he gave this privilege to. I think probably greatest of all is the fact that he did give us the freedom of choice. In other words, human beings would not be fully human beings if we were not given a choice or the opportunity to be tested and to make decisions based on that which we were given. What do I mean? I mean the mere fact that God gave one command that you must not eat, or let me say prohibition. One prohibition that we must not eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It implies, even on its face, that we can eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. In other words, we can freely partake of it if we make that decision to do it. So we bear in mind that even in this perfect world, it is implied that to be perfectly human as God designed us to be, we had to have the kind of choice or the freedom of choice that will enable us to rise above the level of drones, the level of animals, the level of things that have no ability to reason. So therefore, we are made in the image and the likeness of God. And so we have been given that particular ability to make choices. And that is implied when we are given the prohibition, or Adam is given the prohibition, that he must not partake. So as we go forward, I want you to keep that in the back of your mind. With that as your backdrop, the ability that human beings have to make decisions freely, you will now kind of understand what I mean by the agent of the fall. Because in the text, you're going to recognize that Satan, or the serpent in this case, did not force anybody to do anything at all. Let's look at the text. Genesis, the 3rd chapter, verses 1 to 5. Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?" The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden. But did God say you must not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or else you die?" "You will not certainly die," the woman said. The serpent said to the woman, "For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Let us go forward thus far, the text. Now, I want us to first of all recognize that the Bible, or the text of the Genesis, does not explicitly state that Satan tempted Eve. I want that to be crystal clear. What the word says here is that the serpent, which was crafty, he came to her. While I am not disputing that this is an act of Satan, I want us to be true to the text. In other words, let us not take a preconceived notion to this text just yet. Let us see the serpent for what it is, a serpent, because it was later in 1 Timothy 2 and verse 15, or if I'm not mistaken, verse 14 rather, where Paul says that the woman was deceived. And you get the idea that this was from who we call Satan the deceiver. And later on in Revelation chapter 20, you're going to recognize that John describes the serpent that is from the beginning as Satan himself. But up to this point in the reading of the Genesis, he's only known as the serpent, all right? Another of God's creation. Let's go on. Now, the Hebrew word for serpent is the nachash. But the same consonants, Hebrew is a consonantal language. Vowels were just added later on. What you had were vowel indicators. There are certain words, certain of the consonantal words that call for a particular pronunciation. We know that vowels are for pronunciation. And so you find that the Hebrew here for serpent is nakash when it's used as a noun. But when the same word is used in a verbal form, it speaks of not a serpent, but a diviner, right? If it's used as an adjective, it means shining or the shining ones. Why is this important? Because there is an argument that the agent that went to Eve was not a snake, was not what we today call a serpent. The argument states that the agent that went to Eve was actually a divine spirit. And the reason why the term serpent is used was almost as a device, a literary device, because the ancients, those who would read this text before it ever came to us, the ancients knew that serpents were given particular godlike qualities and used in particular contexts when they were trying to speak about divinity. So the context of this argument is that while the word nakash is there, it is not speaking so much of the animal that crawls on its belly, but it is speaking about a divine spirit that came and spoke to her. Now, this, brothers and sisters, may not mesh necessarily with the text, because the text was careful to say that the serpent was craftier than any other animal, any other creature that God had made. So there is an equation, there's an equating between Satan and the other animals that were created, or within the serpent, sorry, and the other animals that were created within the creation narrative. No, another thing that is important is that sometimes we have to recognize that the Hebrew can be dynamic. And then when you study the biblical languages, you're going to find just how dynamic they are. Because the same nakash that speaks of serpent and diviner also means shining one. And whether you want to believe it, yes or no, the root from which we get seraphim, that which Isaiah saw high and lifted up in Isaiah chapter 6, comes from the nakash, right? So some people believe that the seraphim have a snake-like form, while others say no, it has a shining form. So as you get these particular nuances of the one word, as you begin to synthesize them, I want you to understand just how convoluted the idea of the serpent is. Because some people say off the bat, the serpent is Satan. Some say no, the serpent is an animal that used its wit and deceived Eve. No Satan involved. Others say no, the Satan is a divine spirit. But tonight we want to look and see whether or not we can decipher exactly what this says serpent, and I use the term serpent, what the serpent is. All my life I've been calling Satan the serpent, so it's kind of difficult to, So let's move on to that. Now, this serpent was a general term used in the ancient Near East for various types of snake-like creatures. And so as we look at the role that serpents played in antiquity, and in particular within the context of religion and the metaphysical, I want us to note that we cannot divorce how people saw serpents then as to how they see them now. So let's go on. Now, many serpent-like or snake-like creatures were referred to as serpents. And within antiquity, or within the ancient Near East, within ancient times, you're going to find that this word serpent was used to reference particular things. No, within the context of religion, it is believed that serpents were the guardians of thrones. So when the king would have his throne, there would probably be two serpents beside it, put together, right? And these were guarding the king's throne. They were often used as charms against misfortune, especially snake bite. So small figurines or images of snakes were carved and worn around the neck and worn all about in order to ward off mischief and misfortune. Snakes also were often objects of worship. People would actually worship snakes. And so the whole idea, and you hear it today, among modern ministers who are into deliverance ministry, they speak of the python spirit, the snake spirit, right? That's coming out of antiquity. This was the kind of spirit that the young woman in Acts chapter 16 possessed. The one that Paul literally cast out of her because she got on top of his nerves. Serpents were also used to denote health and healing. Oh yes. And that's why if you look at the token that they use, if you look at the insignia that they use to represent health and hospitals, it's actually two serpents intertwining around the staff facing each other. When you remember that God allowed fiery serpents to bite the children of Israel in the wilderness, you'll recognize that in order for them to be healed, Moses had to make what you call the brazen serpent and lifted it up, and whosoever would look on this serpent, of course, will be brought back to health. They would look, because within the context of the ancient world, they knew that serpents were seen as a form of healing, or animals that would actually assist in healing. That is why it took the shape of a serpent, right? Because that was the belief of the time. So probably if it was today, God would say, Moses, I want you to build something in the shape of a syringe, something in the shape of a bottle of medicine. And the people would look, because they would know that this is how healing takes place. Healing in the ancient world was sometimes attributed, whether we want to think it was just being superstitious or not, to serpents. So when Moses put that serpent up, yes, the people would look, because that was the understanding of the time. All right. Now, according to Genesis chapter 3 and 1, the serpent is described as being subtle, but yet he's associated with other created beasts. The fact that the serpent was subtle and crafty kind of brings to mind the idea that the serpent could reason. The serpent, whatever it was, whatever it looked like, it could reason, right? And because it could reason, that gave it the ability to literally deceive someone in whom was the image of God. Can you imagine the level of reasoning that this serpent would need to have in order to be the agent for such a thing? We're going to get there. Not only could the serpent reason, but the serpent could talk. Whichever way they communicated, one thing is sure, they understood each other. So while we may use modern science to try to say that the inflections of a serpent's tongue will not permit it to speak, and it doesn't have the larynx, it doesn't have the voice box, so to speak, you're going to find that so much would have changed from the perfect creation that whatever would have taken place, things could have changed and we do not know. Because one of the things you're going to find is that man's very being was altered as well. So after the fall, there was a change. The ground was cursed. The serpent was cursed. Everything became cursed. Because at this point, even animals started dying. An animal had to die for the sin of Adam and Eve. All right? Next thing we need to know about the serpent is that the serpent had previous knowledge. The serpent somehow kind of knew what the prohibition of God was. So it could be that the serpent, or whatever was informing the serpent, had a particular place of privilege. Why? Because the animals were not commanded not to eat of the tree, because they don't need to eat of the tree. Yes? So with the context that I'm trying to lift up here, I want to get you thinking that the argument that speaks of the serpent not being an animal, but being a divine being, based on the cultural understanding of the time, I want you to think about it. But aside from that, on the other side of the coin, the fact that the serpent was made to be associated with other created animals, it kind of militates against that. But I still want you to keep on thinking as we go through. All right. When you look at the serpent, you recognize something too, that there was a sinister mind at work in him. There was a sinister mind. A mind that set out to deceive, to use craftiness, and to literally cause some measure of discomfort. Because you're going to see an interrogation taking place that was aimed at causing humanity to suffer. The idea is that this animal was already bent. Whatever it was, and whatever animated it, whatever gave it life, whatever caused it to talk and to move and to what have you, whatever it was something that was already spoiled. It was spoiled. And I'm careful how I say that because we are escapists in our thought. And by escapists, I mean that one of the most common questions that I get, and I understand where it's coming from, is that then, Pastor, if God is so loving, why didn't he just wipe out the serpent? Why didn't he just wipe out Adam and Eve and start afresh? And you recognize that it's coming from a place of human frustration. Because based on all the things that it is said that now we have to do, and the things of the world that we have to give up in order to follow the Lord, well, at least that used to be preached. It's not preached anymore, but it used to be preached that we had to give up something, but it's not happening anymore. But you find that the concept here is that God should have saved us all of this suffering and saved us all of this heartache and grief. But one of the things that you must acknowledge as we go on, as you look at how God made man after his own image, you're going to find that the divine prerogatives within humanity, as it exists within God, must be given exercise. It must be given exercise. I lecture at the Bethel Bible College. Well, I have resigned. I resigned as of December of this year. But one of the things that is quite important to note is that the greatest disappointment for me is when I have an A student that is scoring A's all the way through the semester. And when we get to the final exam, which is 40% of the grade, 40% of the grade, this same student who has been acing the coursework all the way through falls down on the exam. The student has to be tested to see if he or she has grasped what was taught. Without that exam, without that test, we cannot prove with any certainty that we can trust to send the student out to stand before God's people and to declare God's word to them. We have to ensure that they are well fit and ready. Remember that Adam was to be the priest, the ambassador, and the one to declare God to the entire created universe. So right now, having within him the gifts of God, the things that God placed in him, you find that this Adam now faced his first test. Been doing well throughout the coursework, but here he is on the final exam. And I'm thinking that it's not looking too good. But let me see if I can bring out an association here. The Bible implies that Satan, the enemy of God, took the form of a serpent, and taking the form of a serpent, he sought to sever the relationship of God and his creatures by attacking the weakest link. In having the first human beings disobey their creator, did not only break relationship between them, but planted the seeds of rebellion in all who will come out of their loins. And so a permanent wedge would be driven by polluting the bloodline of all humanity, and henceforth perverting the original purpose of their existence. The desire to disobey God's command did not, excuse me, originate just in, excuse me a bit, just a little itchy throat, just a little itchy throat, did not really originate in Adam and Eve themselves. But you're going to kind of get a view as to how this interplay came. All right? So let me see if I can, what I'm going to, everybody, is very controversial. And I know people with PhDs who are not able to manage this because, you know, sometimes they are literally so caught up within the context of what we have been taught that research is no longer a part of the thing. But please just permit me to go to the next slide. Excuse me a bit, everybody. Because we're looking at the serpent as Satan, right? Serpent as Satan. Okay, now, as we consider the biblical, or I should say the theological construct that Satan was in fact the serpent, and of course there are many New Testament texts that actually affirms that. What we want to do is to get an understanding first of who the Satan was and what the Satan stood for, right? Now we're going to look at what it stood for in the Old Testament. Pardon me a bit. Right. You know, back in the old church, we would say, boy, that Satan had blocked me. Even if I was coughing, Satan caused a cough to come upon me. I probably want to believe that to be true right about now. But nevertheless, everybody, now you have to understand, from we were children, we were taught and given a definition that Satan is an evil angel that rebelled against God and was cast out of heaven and has fought against God ever since. We are taught in our theology, quite rightly so too, that he has an end. And that end, of course, is the lake of fire. But the term Satan did not really originate so much in heaven. Let me tell you what I mean. Because within the context of the Bible, the place, the geographical, cultural landscape of where the Bible was actually written and where all of this took place, there was a concept of Satan there. There was a common cultural understanding of what a Satan was and what the Satan was sent to do. It is in the very same way that if you are Jamaican and we look and I tell you, man, that brother over there is a jinal, you will not have to search far to know what I mean by the term jinal, unless you are not West Indian, and in particular Jamaican. A jinal, of course, a con artist. But in pointing out that the individual is a jinal, it does not mean that when you go to his birth certificate, you're going to find jinal on the birth certificate. You probably should, but you will not find the word jinal on the birth certificate. Why? Because the word jinal comes out of our cultural understanding of someone who is not to be trusted, right? In the same way, the term Satan comes out of that same kind of a cultural understanding. Because in the culture, the term refers to a number of things. First of all, it refers to someone who has been assigned the role of blocking the way of the wrongdoer. Let me say that again. It refers to someone who has been assigned, given the job, given the task, the role of blocking the way of the wrongdoer. What do you mean, Pastor? Let me get in trouble. When we read in the 22nd chapter, if I'm not mistaken, of Judges. And we learn the story of a man called Balaam when he was sent to curse Israel. And as he journeyed to curse God's people, it is said that the angel of the Lord appeared before him with a sword drawn. Let me get into trouble. In the original Hebrew, the word there is Hasatan. As Satan stood before him. In other words, someone stood to block him there. But the King James translation says the angel or an angel stood to withstand him. The idea of this particular idea of the Satan is one who does what? Blocks the way, who puts a stumbling block in the way. And in this case, it is in the way of the wrongdoer. Let me explain outside of even the book of Judges. In the ancient Near Eastern culture, every king needed a Satan. You're going to see later on some of the things that the Satan does. But the Satan was a vital part of the king's retinue of servants. Vital part. Because he served a particular purpose. Now, we as human beings, and Jamaicans in particular, sometimes we can be elitist. We can be elitist. Because none of us will send our children to school to begin, or for them to come out rather, to work as the dustman, as the man who picks up your garbage. And if anyone on this platform, or even on YouTube, who actually has that particular kind of mindset that, yeah, he can become that or she can become that, please send me a DM. And you and I are going to have a little talk. The reality is that while the dustman may not have the most glorious of jobs, the dustman, or what we call the garbage man, has a vital work to do. If the garbage man doesn't pick up the garbage, rat gonna haul we away. For those who are overseas, the rats are gonna take us away. And the reality we face is that diseases will come, pandemics rather will start, that kind of thing. They play a role. So while you may not, want your child to go through university and take up that role, it doesn't mean that that role is not pivotal to the running of society and to our health. In the very same way, the Satan was a part of the king's retinue. It was a part of the king's court, given the same respect as the rest of them. When the king, listen carefully, you're going to see it. When the king wanted a poll, when he wanted to know where his polling average was, where his approval rating was, he would dispatch the Satan, the Hasatan, out of his kingdom. And the Satan would go observe, cause arguments, see what's happening, and make a report to the king. And I often get in trouble because I say to people that this is why you can put Job chapter 2 or Job chapter 1 and 2 into perspective. Into perspective. Because what is going to happen is that we see a case where God does not ask Satan, what are you doing here? He asked him, where are you coming from? He literally asked the Hasatan of Job chapter 1 and 2 to submit a report. You have gone out, you have done your dirty deed, you have done your work, you've come back here, you don't smell too right, but let me have your report. The reality we face, brothers and sisters, sometimes we tend to dissect it in our own minds in a way that we believe we ought to. So, sorry about that, everyone. The internet was unstable. So what you find is that within the context of our own understanding, sometimes we as preachers, we kind of misapply the text and misinterpret when we say how feisty, the Americans say feisty, and how insolent Satan was, that when the sons of God appeared together, that he just present himself there, and he was insolent to do so. No, he was doing his job. He was just reporting his job. And so the idea of the Satan is one who acts as an agent of divine judgment. When people, and you're gonna get it, people. I want you to begin to see Satan for who he is. We see him as an army combatant, fighting in the trenches and launching forth and telling the hordes to come on, let's move forward. And no, he is better viewed as a prosecuting attorney in a court of law, wherein he has his detectives, he has his constables, he has his sergeants who are actually gathering information to bring to him to put together a dossier. And for those who are following American politics, you remember that famous Russian dossier, to put together a dossier, and it is to be presented at court to prove that the individual that they are collecting the information on is actually guilty. So within the context of the ancient Near East, this was well known. And when I sit sometimes and individuals will challenge me on the argument, I'm saying to them, I do not disagree that Satan now is the great angel that fights against God. What I am saying is that the concept of Satan did not start in the Reformation period. It did not start in the great revival, the great Pentecostal revival. It was in the ancient Near East before it was even written down. So in order to understand, we have to go back to the original. And any good student of hermeneutics knows that in order for a good understanding of the text, a proper exegesis, we have to go back to the original. That's the cardinal rule. So within the original understanding of Satan, the Hasatan, that's what it is in Hebrew, the Hasatan was assigned the role of blocking the way of the wrongdoer. So when Peter or Jesus said to Peter about a discussion he did not hear, Satan desires to have you, to sift you as wheat is sifted. Do you notice Jesus never said, I have delivered you from him? No, no, no. He said, I have prayed for you that your strength will not fail. In other words, Satan gonna rob you, and we allow him to rob you. And if you don't believe, remember the temptation scenario in Luke chapter 4, Matthew chapter 4, where Jesus is not led by the devil to the wilderness to be tempted, He is led by the Spirit to be tested, to be dokimatse, tested. The idea there is that if he is a wrongdoer, he would not have been able to pass the test and overcome the temptation. So therefore, the temptations, while they are cumbersome, they are necessary to prove our character and to prove who we are. So the Hasatan was literally a prover of character. He acts as an agent of divine judgment. He is a saboteur in the ranks. And I think this particular third point makes a whole lot of sense, because here is where it is believed, therefore, now, that Satan, having been the exalted angel, right, now became a traitor to the God who made him and the God who exalted him. So now he's also a saboteur in the ranks. His job is to do that. Now, the truth of the matter is, we, all of us, we work in workplaces, we are with organizations, where some people, are just not to be trusted. There are individuals who are saboteurs. Literal skullduggery is what they literally do, and it doesn't matter what organization it is, whether it is religious or secular. There are people there who are saboteurs in the ranks, right? And so you'll have a man like Judas, and when the time was right, John said, and Satan entered Judas. He was a part of the 12. But when the time was right, his heart was open, his saboteur spirit would have been emboldened, excuse me, by Satan entering him. Now, the idea, therefore, in the ancient Near Eastern culture and understanding is that the Satan worked for the monarchy, for the king, and he was the one who tested the loyalty of the subjects of the king. So let me just put it in that nutshell. He worked for the king and tested the loyalty of those who were the subjects of the king. So let's look at this Satan, because we need to find whether or not the serpent is Satan and Satan is serpent. But in Zechariah 3 and in Job chapter 2, Satan is identified as one of the sons of Elohim, one of the sons of God, a member of the heavenly court, who had the job of persecuting sinners at the bar of divine judgment. And you may ask the question, then how does that comport with the idea that Satan is the person who is the enemy of God, who fights God, and continues to seek the active destruction of God's people? You see, both are correct, because within the context of the ancient Near Eastern understanding, Satan or Hasatan is not a proper name. It is not a name given to any individual. It is a title upon which individuals who do a particular job can actually ascribe. So the idea here is that this particular Satan, and here is where we're going to get the kicker. When we study the language, we're going to find out too that not every term or every time we see the term Satan, it means Lucifer. Sometimes it just means an enemy. If that enemy stands to oppose you, that enemy is a Satan. And we need to get this, because when you speak and you teach the people, and you teach the people this way, there are some holier than thou church individuals who would love to say you are blaspheming and you are this and you are that. Let me tell you something, everybody. There are people in secular colleges who have this information. And when our children go to their colleges and all we teach them is that Satan was an angel from heaven and what have you, when they go there, they are thoroughly convinced that the church has been feeding them fairy tales for the last umpteen years. So by virtue of that, many of our people are hiding from this. But in order to understand how Lucifer fits within the context of being Satan, you have to understand where the thing originated. So the idea here is that the term Hasatan speaks of anyone who stands to block your way or to offend you. That's the Jewish understanding of it. It says that the Satan is a member of the heavenly court who has the job of prosecuting, not persecuting, prosecuting sinners at the bar of divine judgment. Now, if you look at Zechariah chapter 3, the Bible tells us that Yeshua, the high priest, or Joshua, the high priest, he is sitting in the dock, in the court. And as he sits in the dock, he has on filthy garments. And upon seeing the filthy garments, the Satan comes, the accuser comes, the prosecuting attorney comes up. And he says, Your Honor, look at the high priest. He's in filthy raiment. And he goes on and on. His job is to prosecute those who should be loyal to the king and are not. That's his job, right? So the Satan of Zechariah chapter 3 could very well be Lucifer, but we are not sure. We don't know. But what we do know is that we have a good understanding of the role that he plays. And I'm going very slowly tonight because people will go away with the wrong understanding. So I'm going very slowly that you will be able to ask the questions after we're done. So within the context of the ancient Near East, the Satan was seen in several ways. One, he was the original spy. He would spy out the kingdom for the king. And he would come back and he would say to the king, X, Y, or Z. He is the intelligent officer of the king. He brings the intelligence, right? No, we have a police force fighting crime. And often you hear them saying that, you know, they based on intelligence, they went to a particular location and they found. So Satan is the one that goes out and he would get the dirt on people and he would come back. And so when you look at it, you know, he's the informer of the king and he will tell him, no, this original spy. And remember, everybody, I'm talking about the cultural understanding of him now, because anyone could sit in the office of the Satan. It was an office. In the same way, anybody can sit in the office of pastor at Temple Hall, right? Reverend and bishop, not the my birth certificate. It's an office I hold. In the very same way, it's an office that anyone could actually occupy, right? So the original spy, who is the intelligence officer for the king, he is actively going to and fro, observing humanity, reporting back to the court regarding their loyalty to the king. That's his job. So when God said to Satan in Job chapter 2, from whence comest thou? And he says, walking to and fro toward the whole earth. He's saying to God, I have not been idle. I have done my job. And then the Lord says, do you have a report? And he says, I've been trampling up and down in it. Do you have a report? He says, listen, they don't like you. And that's inferred in the way Satan is actually talking to God. Saying walking up and down in it is a way of saying dominating it. You know, getting some responses that really, boy, I can't wait to tell you them. And that's when God says to him, in all of your dominating of your work, and I see you enjoy your job, did you by any chance pass by my servant Job? He said, boy, I may pass by there now. But you have a head around him. I want to test him good, but you protect him so we can't test him good. Brothers and sisters, I want you to get it. The idea here is that the Satan has a job. I have heard people saying, you know, Satan afraid of me. And I ask the question, why do you think you'd be afraid of him? He doesn't have age, because he probably was there before we were created. And we just born in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s coming up. Some of us born in the 2000s. Why would he be afraid of you? People do not understand the concept. The Satan is there to test your true loyalty, to test your true character. And that's why people backslide from church. Because when the Satan comes, when we make that declaration that we belong to God and I will serve him all my days, and the Satan comes, our true character is exposed and we cannot stay. Why? Because we recognize that we have not truly surrendered. The reality we face is that the Satan plays a pivotal role. And if you note what he said to Jesus, since you say you are the Son of God, then do this. The idea in that is that I'm testing your mettle, because you were the one who testified that you belong to God and you are the Son of God. So since you are the Son of God, do this, you know. The Satan is the provocateur who coaxes people into committing crimes for which they can be punished. It literally makes his thing look better, you know. No, I'm hoping that you're grasping that, because I'm ensuring that I take my time. Let me get a little drink here before. Now, in the intertestamental period, so we're moving across the Old Testament, ancient Near Eastern time, to the intertestamental period. My timekeeper allows me to know I have 10 minutes, so let me try and wrap this up, because I think I'm going to get a few questions on this. Now, in the intertestamental period, the contemporary Jewish literature used the term Satan as a proper name. And it was used in this point to denote a super-mundane being who stands in complete opposition to God and is dedicated to frustrating his work. In this period of time between Malachi and Matthew, 400 years of silence, right? This is when the Jewish teachers and philosophers assigned proper name status to the term Satan. So therefore now, the angel that stands in total opposition to God is called Satan. And it is literally given as a proper name. All right? In other words, that is on his birth certificate now. So when he goes anywhere, he can be identified as Satan so-and-so. The idea of the Satan is one who primarily tests the pious or the elect of God, right? And he does this by placing them in forced positions where their dedication and loyalty to God will be tested and revealed. Satan uses afflictions, these are the tools of his trade, and persecutions to detour the faithful from whatever task God has laid upon them. And so watch this. The temptation that we see here seems to coincide with all that we know about Satan. Because here we are now having a serpent assuming the role of the Hasatan. We do not know what kind of spirit is behind him, but we know that it is showing us that he has the propensities of the Satan that we've come to understand by reading and by researching, right? So when you look now at what this serpent or the serpent of Genesis does, he focuses his temptation to assault God's integrity. He attacks the integrity of God. So the tempter accuses God of deception. And I want you to get that. He's accusing God of holding out on Adam and Eve. So when he speaks to Eve, he implies that God perpetuated a lie in order to maintain his own exclusive knowledge of good and evil. It's like, you know, there's some persons who will have particular skill sets, you know, but they aspire to be in a leadership position. So while they're on the team with somebody else, they kind of hold on the thing, you know, and then when they get to the top, now they start to just ring out all of these things. What Satan was saying is that God is like that. In order to keep you down and to exalt himself, he's ensuring that, you know, so he was attacking the integrity of God, trying to say that God was holding out on Adam and Eve. But the strategy behind it is that he would destroy man's integrity by breaking down man's belief in the integrity of God. That's how he destroys man's integrity. And if you look into our world today, you recognize that a lot of people do what they do because they believe there's no God. They believe there's no God. There's literally no one that will hold us to account. That is their belief. So when you look at it, hear what the serpent says. And he attacks God's prohibition. Here's his strategy. Excuse me. He says, hath God said you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? Listen to Eve's response. Eve's response kind of bring out an unreasonableness. Yes? Like there is something within Eve as she reasons, because she has the ability to do that, is saying that God is unreasonable because we don't even have a chance to peruse and to touch the tree, right? So Satan, same strategy, causing her to doubt God's word. Satan says, God is keeping something from you. You shall not surely die. No, sirree. He says to her, your eyes shall be open, you shall be as gods, and you shall know good and evil. The context of all of this that you must see, you know, is that God is being slandered, yes, by the Satan, And God is literally being called a liar, right? The fact that Eve believes it and the fact that she is deceived into believing it gives credence to the serpent. In other words, she's now giving her allegiance. She's believing the creature more than she's believing the creator, right? So let me just quickly, I know that my time is almost up. So I have 7 minutes left. Here is the thing, everybody. The scripture says that when his strategy came to fruition, when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eyes, and so desirable for gaining wisdom, and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes, both of them, were opened, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Here is a conversion. When we as pastors sound altar calls, we call for the conversion experience. But here the tempter has converted Eve, because the tempter gained the trust of Eve. And Eve was willing to trust the tempter more than she was to trust the God who created her. Yes? So what happened here is that Eve accepted what Satan said to be true. What the serpent told her, she said it's true, and therefore it was an assault on God's character. She was joining with him and assaulting God's character. It goes beyond merely just disobeying him. It's what it represents and what it stands for. She has now joined with the serpent in assaulting God's integrity. The mother of all humanity was convinced and fell prey, right? Now, when you look at the tree, it says it was good for food, right? When I looked up the word for food, it means eatable. The fruit was eatable. It was delectable. It was really tempting. And it is believed here that she was expressing that famous line from John, having the lust of the flesh. She lusted after it because of what it could do to her flesh. One of the things that we cannot miss is that Eve was not hungry. Eve was not hungry. Eve had everything she needed in the garden to sustain her, right? If we are to contrast that with Christ, Christ was fasting for 40 days. She was in a garden, he was in a wilderness. She had food to eat, he had nothing to eat. She had time to have discussion with a serpent. The serpent approached Jesus to have discussion with him. No, the thing about it here is that while Eve would have eaten of the fruit, I want you to say that Jesus did not eat of it, even though he was in a tougher situation than her. She looked again and said it was pleasant for the eyes. In other words, it was desirable for pleasure. It brought pleasure to her, right? We call that the lust of the eyes. And it was desired to make one wise. We call that the pride of life, the lifting, the self-impulse, that which will cause me to exalt myself. When we speak about, there's a time we used to talk in the church and we say that a man is in the flesh. It's speaking of his self-impulse. He takes the mic and he puts on a performance. He's in the flesh, But when it is done to the glory of God, they say he's in the spirit, kind of a thing, But you find that based on the fact that she saw it was good for food, or she convinced herself it was pleasant to the eyes, and she desired to have it, an inward defection had already taken place. An inward move towards that which was evil. So the Bible says in verse 6 that the woman did eat and gave also to her husband, and he did eat. Eating the forbidden fruit was the expression of an inward movement of apostasy in the moment of satanic beguilement. So while Satan tempted her and Adam, well, he tempted her, there was a moment within her when she took the bait and decided, yes, I'm going to move forward with this. All right? When you look at the case of Adam, it's not the same. Because while the enemy seduced her, the enemy used her to seduce him. Same thing with Samson and Delilah. And he, being of sound mind and body, made that decision. And to this day, it is believed that the weakness of the man still lies within the power of his woman. So hear what one man says. And Adam was not the one deceived. This is Paul. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. But women will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with propriety. That text is loaded too, because the whole idea of the woman being saved through childbearing comes out of the seed of the woman. For your seed shall crush the head of the serpent. But irrespective of that, we find that the deliberate disobedience and the willful rejection of God's commandment by Adam and Eve is what caused the fall of humanity. So the Satan did his job. It is Adam and Eve who did not do theirs. Notice, the Satan tested them upon the integrity of God's word, and it showed that they did not believe it, right? Because the commandment is given here. The first step, the commandment is given. Thou shalt not eat, right? But then here comes Satan and he questions the commandment. Hath God said? When you look at step 3, it was Eve who made reference to the commandment. He said, neither shall you touch the tree, when God never said that. When you look at the 4th step, there's a denial of God's commandment. So he's treading her along. You shall not surely die. And then the 5th stage, the commandment is disobeyed. And he did eat. So brothers and sisters, just allow me to close this tonight. The prohibition, listen carefully, that was imposed upon Adam and Eve was for the purpose of proving the ultimate criterion for faith in God. Unquestioning commitment to God's commandment, that is faith. That is faith. And remember last week we said that it is not that God would not have allowed them to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but they were newborn babes. They could not manage it at this stage. God would have to work on them and deal with them and form them and continue to have fellowship with them. And they would then understand, as he does, how to handle this exhaustive, expansive knowledge of what is good and what is evil, right? So when you look at it, the prohibition was the embodiment, or God telling them not to eat, that commandment was the embodiment of the sovereignty, the authority, the wisdom, the goodness, the justice, the holiness, and the truth of God. God knows they could not manage it. Just like how in our day, if you give a man a little power, all of a sudden you can't control him. He begins to abuse his position and everybody else with it. But in this case, we find that it was an attack and an assault against the goodness of who God is and his character. The transgression or the sin was an assault on God's majesty, a repudiation of his sovereignty, a doubting of his goodness, a disputing of his wisdom, and a contradiction of his veracity. In other words, the evil spirit that's at war with humanity, he literally fights against the plan of God for the created universe. And by means fair and foul, he seeks to achieve his intended ends. Satan appeals to the weakness of the human nature. He tempts the individual appetites present within the individual. Satan never forces anyone to sin, he tempts them to sin. Finally, humans are susceptible to the weakness of their own spirits and hence make bad choices, right? So we leave it there for this evening. Of course, we have probably come to the end and we want to open for questions. But let me just extend my thanks to those who joined us on the YouTube platform for being with us. And, really want to ask that you continue to like and subscribe to the channel. We are trying to build up the channel of the Temple Hall Church. So we invite you to subscribe, share the video with a friend, recommend it to a friend, and just press that like button. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to being with you next week, Wednesday, at the same time. God bless you as we sign off from the YouTube platform.